Welcome back, everyone. We're diving right into part 5 of our 10-part explainer on ICD-10-CM Chapter 15 coding. Today, we're going to master one of the absolute most intricately structured areas of obstetrics coding, multiple gestations. Whether you're brand new to the field or a seasoned coder just looking to sharpen up your precision, this explainer is designed to give you total clarity. Coding for multiple gestations requires an incredible amount of attention to detail, mostly because we have to track not just the mother's health, but the unique status of each individual fetus throughout the entire pregnancy. It's like a giant clinical puzzle, and we're going to break down these complex mechanics into super clear, actionable steps.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with a multiple gestation coding overview, take a look at the O31 complication-specific codes, dive into those 7th character extension rules, and finish things off with a real-world clinical case walkthrough.
All right, let's jump right into Section 1, Multiple Gestation Coding Overview, focusing on routine care versus complications.
So, right off the bat, there's a really stark contrast you've got to master to ensure accuracy. Your O30 category is your baseline. It's your foundation for routine maternal care. When an expectant mother of twins, triplets, or more comes in for just routine multifetal surveillance and everything is progressing totally normally without any acute issues, you live right there in the O30 category. But the O31 category is strictly reserved for managing acute complications that are absolutely specific and unique to multifetal pregnancies. You only shift over to O31 when the issue at hand is a direct complication of the multiple gestation itself, not just general routine care or a standard maternal disorder. Drawing a hard line in the sand between routine surveillance and acute complication management is your very first step.
Now, to safely assign a routine O30 code, there is a mandatory checklist of documentation you need to hit. First up, your documentation has to explicitly state the number of fetuses. Twins, triplets, quadruplets, you get the idea. Second, you absolutely must capture the specific trimester. For instance, the code O30.013 specifically denotes a twin pregnancy in the 3rd trimester. And third, and listen, this is a totally critical rule for Chapter 15 across the board. You must always pair these O30 codes with the appropriate gestational age code from the Z3A series. If you've got an O30 code on your claim, you need a Z3A code sitting right there alongside it, like Z3A.34 for 34 weeks gestation.
Okay, so that's the routine side. Let's shift gears to Section 2, O31 complication-specific codes, where we categorize those multifetal issues.
This is where we talk about acute issues happening specifically because the patient is carrying more than one fetus. Let's break down these O31 subcategories. O31.1 is what you use for a continuing pregnancy after the spontaneous abortion of one or more fetuses. So, say a patient miscarries one twin but the other continues to develop normally, this is your subcategory. O31.2 covers a continuing pregnancy after an intrauterine death, or IUFD. O31.3 is what you assign when the pregnancy continues after an elective fetal reduction procedure, like reducing a quadruplet pregnancy down to twins to protect the mother and the remaining fetuses. And finally, O31.8 acts as a sort of catch-all for other specified complications. Vanishing twin syndrome in early pregnancy is a really classic clinical example you're going to encounter here. Each of these subcategories tells a very highly specific clinical story.
But with highly specific stories comes a pretty major coding pitfall. You have to strictly avoid relying on the unspecified code O31.9 whenever humanly possible. If a provider's documentation is so incredibly vague that you feel forced into an unspecified code for a multifetal complication, that right there is a prime trigger for a physician query. Your ultimate goal is precision, and precise, rock-solid clinical documentation is really the only way to avoid the O31.9 trap.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 3, 7th character extension rules, where we look at identifying the specifically affected fetus.
Because when you're dealing with complications in multiple gestations, it's just not enough to say a complication occurred, right? We have to know exactly who it happened to. That is exactly what the 7th character does. There's a very distinct rule separating when you use a 0 versus the numbers 1 through 9. You assign the number 0 as your 7th character in 3 very specific instances. For single gestations, when the documentation is just totally insufficient to determine the affected fetus and you literally can't get clarification, or when it is genuinely clinically impossible to determine which fetus is actually affected. On the flip side, you assign numbers 1 through 9 to specify the exact fetus affected. Fetus 1 gets a 1, fetus 2 gets a 2, and so on.
Building these codes takes a bit of, well, architectural discipline. Step 1 is selecting your base code. Let's say it's O31.3 for elective fetal reduction. But ICD-10-CM rules dictate that the fetus identifier absolutely has to be in the 7th position, and our base code only has 4 characters. So this leads right into step 2. You have to utilize placeholder X characters to bridge that gap and maintain a valid structure. You literally just pad the code with X's until you reach the end. Then finally, in step 3, you drop in that vital 7th character at the very end of the string to identify the fetus. If you miss those placeholders, your code is totally invalid and it's going to get denied.
All right, let's put all this theory to the test. Section 4, Clinical Case Walkthrough. Let's apply these mechanics.
Here is your scenario. A patient with an initial twin pregnancy presents for a procedure at 12 weeks gestation. Due to clinical indications, an elective fetal reduction is performed specifically on fetus 2. Following the procedure, the pregnancy continues safely with fetus 1. I want you to just take a brief mental pause here. Look closely at the details. 12 weeks, twin pregnancy, elective reduction, and fetus 2 is the one affected. How would you physically construct this code based on everything we've talked about today?
Let's see if you nailed it. The really crucial point here is how perfectly the placeholder and extension mechanics align with the documentation. Let's build it together step by step. Step 1. The condition is a continuing pregnancy after an elective fetal reduction, so that points us directly to base code O31.3. Step 2. Because we desperately need that 7th character, and O31.3 is only 4 characters long, we insert 2 placeholder X characters to fill up the 5th and 6th spaces. Step 3. The documentation explicitly tells us the reduction was performed on fetus 2, so we apply the 7th character 2. That gives us our completed primary code, O31.3XX2. And finally, step 4, we never ever forget our Chapter 15 rule. We must pair this with the gestational age code. At 12 weeks, we assign Z30A.12. So your final claim is going to feature O31.3XX2 followed perfectly by Z30A.12. That, my friends, is precision coding.
Mastering these little nuances is exactly what transforms a good coder into a truly great one. Because think about it. If we misidentify a fetus in a patient's medical record, what kind of massive clinical cascade of errors could that trigger down the line? It's a huge deal. Precision absolutely matters. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for part 6. This is Decode Healthcare with Harshal.